He's going to start with deadly force. I was going to keep my seat.
Get the shotgun off and get the fuel.
Well, I tell you what, I'm very honored to be with these distinguished gentlemen here. These guys all have degrees and diplomas. I don't have any of those. I just want to go back to what I left off with a while ago. When in '99, back when we was involved in trying to do something to protect gun rights, because I seen where this country was going. And we went there. In 2000, well, let me back up a little bit. Our group, as I said, we began to grow. We've been, in the beginning, if we had 15 or 20 people, we had a crowd at a meeting. But eventually the numbers came up, and now on a monthly meeting, we'll have anywhere from 150 to 200 people, and that's consistent. And we've been doing this for almost 14 years, which is saying something for a grassroots organization that's been in existence that long. They normally don't last that long. I've been appointed the director from the beginning of this thing. I wasn't intending to be, but the folks wanted me to stay in the lead on this thing. Early on, about I think it was along about 2000, Indiana, like I said, this is a group that was just dedicated to just defending our gun rights. We weren't out there pushing on things. We just want to be left alone. We're just like you. We're just families that enjoy firearms and everything else in life. Just leave us alone. Deal with bad guys. Leave the rest of us alone. But normally, what happens when somebody does something stupid, they write laws for everybody. That's usually what almost all laws come up. Of one incident, some legislator passes a law, everybody's in this web now. And so in about 2000, the state police, up until that time, or during that time, when you were purchasing a firearm, a transfer, the dealer would have to call not only the NICS, but he also had to call the state police because they had to check it through both groups for that transfer. And the Indiana State Police had sent a notification out to all of the gun dealers in Indiana that they were no longer going to conduct background checks on weekends and holidays. And I remember that one Friday night when I was coming home from work, and I drove a truck for Yellow Freight Systems. That's what I did all my life. I was a driver for the Yellow Freight Truck Systems. I was coming home, stopped by the gun shop on this Friday night, and he showed me the letter he got from the Indiana State Police. And it was a bold written letter that said notice. It was all, shadowed lettering. It was notice. The Indiana State Police will no longer conduct background checks on weekends and holidays, and it was very right to the point. It was in your face kind of letter. Well, what that was going to mean is that at a gun show, for example, you weren't going to be able to take possession of a firearm during that gun show because who's going to answer those calls? How would the dealer call it? You'd have to come back or meet up with the dealer later on, and some of these dealers come from a long way, so that was really going to be a shot at closing down gun shows. So it just so happened that the following Saturday was our Patriot meeting night. And so I instructed all of our folks to write, or rather to call the governor's office and state who you were and tell them that this was not an option. We weren't going to take this. And so that Monday, I remember making my phone call. And I called the firearms division. Well, first I called I called the governor's office. And the lady that took my call, when I told her why I was calling, she says, well, you need to call the Indiana State Police. I said, well, no. This is the governor's baby, and I want him to rock this one. So she took my information, and then it was about a half hour later, the Indiana State Police Firearm Division called me. And this lady, her name was Major Caroline Butts, called to tell me that this is what they were going to have to do because they had no one to take those calls on weekends. Nobody was willing to work the weekends up there. And I said, well, ma'am, do you realize how many people you have in Indiana who are retired would be happy to take a job like that, would be willing to do that? She said, well, we hadn't considered that. And I said, well, there's going to be some other ways out of this. But I said, you're going to really shut down gun shows with this kind of policy. So she took my information. And then about a half hour after that phone call, I got a call from the Indiana State Police Superintendent, Marvin Caraway, I think was it? Caraway. And he called, and I was curious. I said, why? I said, how'd you get my number? I said, I didn't call your office, and this is the second call I've got from this agency. I said, how? He said, well, the problem is we got your number because all these calls right now are going into the governor's office, and they're now directing them to our office, and they're jamming our lines up. And I'm asking you if you would call off the dogs. I said, well, you know what, sir? I said, we could do that if you guys could find a resolution to this problem. He says, I guarantee you we will. He says, we will have this matter corrected. And he said, I can assure you that. He said, what I'm asking is if you will contact your dealers and let them know that we will rectify the problem. I said, well, how about this, sir? How about you sending letters to all of them, just like you did the first letter, and telling them what you're telling me? He said, we can do that. And sure enough, they did. I didn't bring any copies, but I got copies of the original letter. It was in bold print. Notice we will no longer conduct background checks. And I got the letter they sent out just days after that phone call. It was in italicized lettering. We are pleased to announce. And our group was really, really pumped up that this was just a handful of people that changed the way things were happening for the whole state of Indiana. For all 6 million people in this state, that change come about through the efforts of just 25 or 30 people. It was amazing. Maybe not even that many. And I know that they probably thought they had that we have 1,000 people in our membership. We don't have dues. We're just as plain, bare bones grassroots as it gets. We don't have appointed positions. It's just a group of folks that get together once a month, and we just keep our eyes and ears open on what goes on here locally and statewide. So the next thing that we came up on was a year or so later, one of our members was four-wheeling down there in some DNR property in the stripper pits down there around Boonville, southern part of the state. And he got tangled up with some troublemakers, and I don't know what happened, but he had a handgun with him, and he had a license to carry his handgun. And he didn't draw his gun or nothing, but somebody made a call. Anyway, a conservation officer arrived at the scene and got everything squared away. Nobody got a ticket or anything, but this conservation officer told our member that he was in violation of state law by having that loaded gun on an off-road vehicle. That's prohibited. And so the gentleman came to our next meeting, told us what happened to him. And so I called Senator Johnny Nugent. And speaking of Johnny Nugent, too, before I forget, if anybody's here that is a member of the NRA and has been a member of at least 5 years or longer, Johnny Nugent is also he's a state senator. He's also on the board of the NRA, and he's up for re-election. And we need petitions signed. My wife Margie's got the petitions back there. If you guys would, during break time, would be willing to sign that petition for him, we'd appreciate that, because he's a very good, strong pro-gun state senator. But anyway, I called Johnny Nugent. I told him what the situation is. He said, Jim, he said, how did we get along like that on the books? I said, I don't know, sir, but it's been about 37 years. And so he said, well, he said, we can do something about that. He said, I'll put something together. He said, I might need you to come up and testify before a committee on it. I said, I'd be happy to do this. Now, I've never done anything like this before in my life. I got to tell you, folks, in school, I never raised my hand. The teacher, please don't call on me. Give me my C. I'll get out of your school. You'll never know I was here. I don't want no attention. I don't want to stand in front of nobody and talk. I never intended to ever get to this point where I'm at now. But things happen for a reason, I guess. But nevertheless, he wrote the bill, and when we went up to testify, and I took off of work, I gave up a day's pay. We drove all the way up to Indianapolis, 175 miles, paid the $20 for parking, sit there all day long while they heard bill after bill. Finally ours rolled up. And when those senators heard what we were doing, and the DNR was up there to fight us on this. They didn't like the idea we were stripping one of their gun laws off the books. And I understand that's how they are about that. You know, I'm not picking at them. It's just they just didn't like the idea we was trying to repeal something. But the senators, a lot of those guys were farmers and stuff that's on the committee, and none of them knew that law existed. And one of the senators asked, said, "You mean if I'm on my own property, if I'm farming, if I'm on my tractor, I've got a handgun on there for varmints or critters, whatever, while I'm plowing or disking, I'm in violation of law." And the DNR said, it's a misdemeanor, 1 year sentence. And you couldn't have it on anything: lawnmower, garden tractor, four-wheeler, snowmobile, trail bike. even if he's on your own property, you couldn't have a loaded handgun, or a loaded gun period, on any off-road vehicle. So we worked on that bill, got it passed, and repealed that. Now, the DNR told me and Johnny Nugent, that they would be willing to support it if we limited it to handguns only and people with a license to carry handguns. And I knew he had a lot of influence in the committee, so we agreed to do that. But I did tell him that at some point we're going to also include that with long guns as well. So the law, we got the law repealed. And so those with a handgun license can now have a handgun on off-road vehicles. And that was another major accomplishment for our group. We were, again, very enthusiastic to see what people can do. In life, nothing comes to you. It doesn't come to you. Nobody lays it in your lap. If you want it, you've got to reach out and take it. You've got to make it happen. And we understood the concept behind that. So this just energized us more and more to become more effective. We understood that we could do these things. And then we got involved in helping local and statewide politicians running for office, people who were good for gun owners, who understood what our cause was about. And so we would help them in their campaigns. We got involved politically. And then so much so that to the point where, well, before I get to that point, in 2004 is when, I think it was 2004, 2005 session coming on. I had asked Senator Nugent to introduce a bill for us for a license that you could go online and renew your 4-year handgun license. And the reason I was doing that was because in Evansville, we live in Posey County. We don't live in Vanderbilt County where Evansville sits. But I had folks coming to our meetings and coming to me personally and saying, you know, Jim, the Evansville Police Department makes it so difficult for us to renew our license. And they were. It was historic. They would either leave the license laying, and the chief of police down there told me that he would, it was his fault. He said he wouldn't act on processing those things until he just had to. And he admitted that to me. And they were setting up their own rules and regulations on what people had to do to get their license. It was making it very difficult. And I thought, why would you do that for somebody that's willing to submit their whole life, background checks and all of this research? These are people who are good citizens, willing to obey the law and comply with the rules. And still you want to make it an uphill ride for them. I didn't understand that. Now in Posey County, it took all of 10 minutes to go down there, and our sheriff would process it. You got your fingerprinting done, you got your forms, and you went out and mailed it to the state police, and you're on your way. But it was the Evansville Police Department down there. It's just really making a real tough situation for those folks. So Johnny Nugent, I asked him about if we could do this online, where you could just renew and bypass the locals. And he said, well, Jim, he said, we could, but I don't know how to write that language. And I said, well, you know what? I could write it. And like I said, I was still working, driving trucks. He said, well, you write something, get it to me, and I'll get it to the LSA, Legislative Service Agency. So I wrote the language, and we worked on that bill, and we got it passed through the Senate. And the way I wrote it was that you could renew online, and the $10 that you was normally at that time was, I think your license was like $27. It was $10 for the locals, $15 for the state police, and $2 for the notary public. So anyway, I wrote it so that the $10 that was going to locals would go to the state police to help offset the cost of the website. I thought that would be a way to do it. So when we went up to the State House to testify on behalf of that, we got it passed through the Senate, but on the House side, they sat on it, and the state police was fighting us on it. And I didn't understand why they were holding back on this. But anyway, the committee chairman on the House side decided not to let the bill get a hearing, and it died. So that was in 2005, so it was a lost cause. So that was our first defeat. And then in January of 2006, we tried it again. And at that time, we had not only Johnny Nugent willing to reintroduce the bill, but we had a state rep at the time named Troy Woodruff from the Vincennes area, newly elected, and he asked for a copy of my bill. So he said, Jim, I think we had one on the House side and the Senate. It'd give us a better chance of getting something like this passed. So I gave him a copy of what we had, and when we went up there in January, about mid-month of 2006, the state police caught us out in the hall before we went in, and he said, I'm here to help you guys on this. He said, after looking at what you had, he said, I recognize that it is a good measure, so we're going to support the bill. So during testimony, the state police, we testified what we had to say. The state police, when he testified, he told the committee that he shot him a price tag of what it was going to cost for this website, and it was 6-digit figures. That was huge. I mean, I thought, where did he get a price like it? And Senator Long was the chairman of the committee at that time, and he said, we're not even going to give this bill consideration. He said, there's no way Indiana has this kind of money, and he said, we're just not going to consider this bill. No vote taken. So we walked out of there, and we was really upset. We drove, again, a day's pay, lost a day's pay. We drove all the way up there for this, and dead in the water. And Johnny Nugent was upset about it too, Senator Nugent, because he worked hard on this measure. He said, the gentleman from the state police said, I know you have a House version, I'll help you guys over there. I said, no, don't help us no more. You just killed it. I said, I got guys can do websites for free. I said, I just don't know where you got a price like that. So we came back home, and it was later in the month, and like I said, I was still driving a truck. My route at the time was down in Kentucky. I remember this day so well. Henderson, Kentucky, Morganfield, that was the area I drove. And I was at the Eaton Axle Corporation and called Margie on the payphone from the driver's room. We didn't have cell phones yet. And she told me Johnny Nugent had just called us to tell us that our bill was in serious trouble and it wasn't likely to get passed. And I thought, man, you know, we worked so hard on this thing. And so from Eaton Axle to my next stop, which was in Seabury, Kentucky, KB Alloys, I'm thinking to myself, you know, lifetime handgun license. I don't think a state's got that. If we could get a lifetime handgun license, you'd only have to hold your nose once, and that was it. So when I got down, I called Margie back, and I told her, I said, call Johnny Nugent and tell him I want to introduce language in the bill we're working with on lifetime handgun license. And so when I got home at night, I got on my computer, and I'm not much on computers, but I got on my computer, and I fired a letter off to Troy Woodruff. And it was like 11 o'clock at night. I figured he's in bed, but I wanted to let him know what I was wanting to do. He writes right back, this guy's up. He says, Jim, I like the idea. He says, how do you want to write this? I said, well, you know, we're back and forth on this thing. And he suggests that we would go for a, he said, he's thinking like $50 for a lifetime handgun license. I said, Troy, I would like to think we could get away with it, but I said, the locals would fuss about that. I said, there's no way they'd settle for $50. He said, well, how about 100? If you have a current license and you're renewing, how about 100? I said, yeah, I'd pay 100. He said, maybe in 125 for a first-time application. I said, yeah, I think we will do it. So that's what we wrote the bill up, and Johnny wrote it up on the Senate side, and so we got the bill. It was funny. The Senate bill would move along, it would hit a wall, then we'd push on the House version, and then it would hit a snag. We'd go back to the Senate, back and forth, and over the months during that session of 2006, ultimately we wound up getting the House version passed. The only difference between the Senate and House version was the Senate version was going to let you, if you had a current license, you could renew instantly for the lifetime. On the House version, you had to wait till you were 180 days within expiration. And if you guys recall back then, the 4-year license, you could renew it until you were within 30 days of expiration. So this was a big improvement all the way around. Anyway, we got the House version passed, the governor signed it, and he invited our group to come up for a ceremonial signing of the bill. And so we took there was like 3 vandals. There was a whole bunch of us, a caravan of us went up there. We all come into the State House. It was such a neat day because Eric Holcomb, who was Governor Daniel's chief of staff at the time, he knew us well. And you could, at that time, you could still pack a gun in the State House. He says, Jim, you guys we're going to do a photo op. He says, you guys aren't going to like flash your coats open and show all your guns. But we're all, and it was so good, we're all standing around the governor while he signs us into law. I get the ink pen, he signed the law with. I'm thinking, man, this is neat. You know, this is regular common people, and we made this happen for all the folks in Indiana. Just a small group of people did this for the whole state. And I was so proud that we was involved in this thing, and that we had legislators like this that was willing to help us in this. And it was all the calls made during that process to their own particular legislators to support the bill, and phone calls and postcards that we sent out. And it was also very gratifying to know that we could be in our state capitol, around our governor, all armed with our firearms, and nobody had any sense of fear about it. I felt good that we live in this country, in the state of Indiana, where the government didn't fear the people having their guns. I thought that was really something. Now, you know, since then they've Homeland Security banned people from bringing their guns in the State House. I'm disappointed in that, but nevertheless, at that moment, I felt proud that we were able to do that. And nevertheless, we were very happy that we got that law passed. And as Brian said, yeah, almost before the ink dried, the rumors started coming out that I heard they're going to discontinue the lifetime handgun license. Yeah, well, let me tell you, folks, that was a legislative process, not a administrative process. To remove or repeal the lifetime handgun license, we would have to elect a lot of anti-gun people into the legislature and have an anti-gun governor who would sign it. We could do that, but that's what it would take. The state of Indiana enjoys a lot of revenue as a result of those handgun license, and so anyway, that was a big win for, I think, for the folks here in Indiana. That's fun. And so then that was in 2006. And 2 years ago, the more we became more involved, and some of our people started running for offices, maybe even county seats or even a school board seat or something. They become more politically involved, and I decided to run for office myself, and I ran for state senate in 2010, got elected, and I was real happy that somebody like myself, a working class guy, can be up there at the state level. I admire very much all the people up there in the legislature. A lot of these folks do have degrees, and a lot of them have diplomas, and they're very intelligent individuals, and I'm very happy to be working with a body of individuals like this. I always thought it would be nice too, though, for a working class person, somebody that understands the struggles of life for working people, just everyday citizens. And I think that's one of the things I'm able to have up there, is because I don't propose to be something I'm not. And so it's been a very nice experience. Now, last year was my first year in office, and I guess sort of like the babes in the wood kind of thing, because two bills that I introduced right out of the get-go that I felt were long overdue in regards to gun rights. I had LSA write these laws up for me. I wrote them, actually. I knew what I wanted, but you got to take it to these attorneys at LSA who will research state laws, local ordinances, even federal laws on how, and maybe even research laws in other states to see how your particular bill will weather during debates and discussions. So the two bills that I introduced right off the bat was Senate Bill 292 and Senate Bill 506. And I'll start with Senate Bill 506. That bill, I felt, was a significant bill because what it would do would let people in Indiana transport a handgun in their vehicle without a handgun license. Because up until at that point, you purchase a handgun, you could buy it, you could take it home, and that's about as far as you could go with it. Unless you had a license, you couldn't take that gun out off your property. You was pretty much confined to keeping it on your property without a license. And we had instances, in fact in 2010, we had some instances where people were at gun ranges shooting, and there was one that took place up in north of Indianapolis where the DNR came up there, and it was a day where everybody's up at the range shooting, and they had everybody put their guns down. They wanted to look for, they asked for their handgun license. Well, some people didn't have a handgun license. A lot of people didn't realize that you had to have a handgun license to have a handgun off your property. And so the ones that didn't have a license, they cited them, they confiscated their guns, and it got some media attention. Naturally it would. And so somebody asked me if we could do something to correct this. I said, absolutely, we can try. So I introduced 506, which would say that you can transport your handguns to designated areas. And we got it passed. The law now allows you to have a handgun. You have to have, if you don't have a license, you can take your handgun with you in your vehicle as long as it's unloaded, secured, and not accessible to the driver, like in a trunk or maybe in the backseat of a pickup truck or someplace that's not readily acceptable. And you can now take your gun to Grandpa's farm on a weekend. Go out there if you want to punch some holes in paper, do some target practice and like that. You can take a gun to a gun training course, or you can take it to a gunsmith. You can take it to a gun show. You can take it to designated areas. And so that was a pretty good piece of legislation. I mean, I wrote it. I'm proud of that, but I thought it was a significant accomplishment for people here in Indiana that was getting caught doing things that they thought they were legal to do. Now, 292, and that bill would have gotten probably a lot of attention on its own But Senate Bill 292 was by far the most controversial piece of legislation we had for the year 2010. 292, my proposal, and I tell you, I worked very hard on that bill. I worked long hours on that thing. Margie could tell you, I'm brand new at the State House, brand spanking new. And just to show you how new I was, the year before that, we were retired. We were working at the state park down in New Harmony, outside of in Posey County, and it was a nice retired job. I worked mowing grass, and she was working in the flowers in the state park. And I thought, it's so funny that a year before I was mowing grass on the state park, and this year I'm a state senator working inside State House. And the guys mowing grass around the state house are mowing on the same mowers I was using at the state park. Sometimes I want to give them a $20 bill and trade off with them. They could go inside and I'll mow. But on this bill, my proposal was that up until then, in Indiana, everybody up and down the state, border to border, every city and town, every mayor, every chief of police, every city council, county council, anybody could adopt an ordinance of their own making on gun controls. Whatever they wanted, they could write these ordinances. And the problem was, the way I seen it was, when you apply for your handgun license, you're getting this license from the state of Indiana, you're assuming that you're good to go. I mean, the state has deemed you worthy of having, you're a proper citizen by definition, so here's your license, and you would think you're good to go. But you folks up here, would you know what ordinances were passed in Evansville? Or Jasper, Indiana, or Bloomington, or Boonville? No, you wouldn't. And people down there when you travel. So here you're traveling across the state, you roll into town, you could find yourself in some kind of a problem thinking you're quite within compliance with the law, but you're breaking their particular ordinance. And I thought, how would the people react if we did that with our driver's license? If there were towns that would say, yeah, we know it's a state-issued driver's license, however, you need this endorsement from our city to be legal. That wouldn't go so well. And we're talking about a constitutional right here. Not a privilege, but a constitutional right. And we had people snagged up in this spider web of laws and rules and regulations, uncountable. I didn't know how many we did have. Maybe Brian would, because he does extensive work on this. Nevertheless, my intention was no more. No more. Senate Bill 292 compactly said, you cities and towns, you're not writing no more gun laws. We're going to go back under the uniformity of state law, because I think over the years, the state of Indiana has done a pretty good job of adopting a pretty good framework of laws on guns. And not only are you going to not write any more laws, but all of the stuff that you've been compiling since the invention of the wheel comes off the books. We're clearing the slate. We're going back into the uniformity. So, and I got to tell you, that bill generated nationwide attention. And I'm brand spanking new. Now, we were about 3 blocks from the State House where we stayed at, and there would be mornings, like 3 in the morning, you roll over in bed, I wake up, I'm thinking about this law, this bill I'm proposing. I would get up, you're not going back to sleep, because I'm thinking what this day's going to bring, the questions and the scenarios I'm going to get hit with again this day. I'd get dressed, I'd walk down to the State House, I'd walk in there, 4 in the morning, nobody in that building. The only people in there would be me and the goblins. Nobody, not even the cleaning people was in that building. And I'm researching all of the laws I can find, all of the state laws, all of the city and county laws, federal laws, and I happened to come across Brian, one of the state legislators in LA told me about Brian Caillou in his book. And so in the course of all this, I got Brian, I called him, and he was so gracious, he sent me a couple of his books, and I was using his books too as research in what I was working on in this bill. And so during the, when you stand there before this body of senators, of this, a group of people who are, have a background that is very influential. And these people have been, some of these people have been up there for many, many years. And here I am, a brand new senator, proposing such a wild, crazy idea of taking on all these cities and counties and towns with what they've been doing over the years. And the legislators would throw everything they had, especially those who were fighting us on this thing, the ones who don't think you have really all that many rights on guns. I had to be able to address every kind of scenario and what ifs and how about things that he could throw at me. And this thing don't happen just over a course of a day or so. I mean, the bill, when you introduce it, it has to go through a first reading by the Senate Pro Tem, and he'll decide whether it's even going to get a hearing, if he's going to move it on. And he did. Senator Long did. He passed it on to a committee, which I was on, correction committee. And so when you're on a committee, you stand before this committee the day that it's in that committee, and you again speak on behalf of the bill. You tell them what you're trying to do. And there are people, the general public can stand there and come into those committees and testify, either in support or against them. And there were people representing the cities and towns across the state of Indiana that was fighting me tooth and nail on this thing. And then you get it to the committee, then you bring it down to the Senate floor for a second reading. And you have to speak to all of the senators on what you're trying to do. And again, those legislators that want to try to stop you can do their level best as to tell you, and the whole world watching, because this is all on the internet, it's all streamed live, everything that goes on up there. So anybody on the planet can watch what you're doing here in Indiana. And they're trying to tell everybody why this is a bad idea. And you gotta be sure you know what you want to do. You gotta hold your ground. And if you are a little bit thin-skinned, this is no place for you, I guarantee you. And I got enough hard bark on me that I know that what I was doing was right. And I wasn't going to back down. And during the course of this time, the thing got so much attention, the attorneys for the National Football League got involved in this thing. And Jim Irsay, who owns the Indianapolis Colts, was also, I understand, was twittering my name about this bill, which is going to crimp the style of promoters and ball games and everything like that. And he was worried about people bringing guns into the Super Bowl that was coming up, you know. And so it was, it got a lot of attention. I think I was on the front page of every paper in the state of Indiana at one time. And you can imagine how they was portraying me. A brand new state senator proposing that all of these laws we're protecting our own little communities with are in threat of being abolished. And I even got called by the New York Times. The New York Times called. And I asked myself, what? You don't have enough problems in New York? What do you worry about what we do in Indiana? And then, and you guys know who Alan Combs is? He called me. Alan Combs called me. It was on his national radio show. My LA called me. She says, Senator Tom's got a call from Fox News. Alan Combs wants to know if you'll come on a show. I said, are you kidding? I'll pay to go on that show. So I'll live it. Okay. Anyway, we got an interview. You can listen to the interview. It's on the internet. It was about a 15, 20-minute interview. Two-thirds of the way into it, he told me, he said, well, because I made him answer my questions, he says, I want to thank you for hosting my show tonight. That's no problem. But we did get law passed, and now you do have rights to take your firearms with you in places where you couldn't before. And I'll close up here, but on that issue, that was a long, hard-fought battle. That bill went through the Senate, got passed by a huge majority, went over to the House. The House stripped it clean, took all the wheels off of it. And I told them, I said, if you kill the bill, when it comes back, if you amend it up and ruin the bill, I'll throw it in the trash can. I said, I will not give the folks in Indiana a bill that they think is a program bill when it's not. And I told the NRA that too. I said, you guys messed it up. And they did. So when it came back to me, final day of the session, it went to conference committee. The chance of the bill surviving that's almost zero. We put it back together, and Brian was very instrumental in this whole process. Brian testified before committees on this. He helped us in getting this thing done. We got it through the committee, put it back together, and got it passed that night. Late hours of the night, last night of the session, we got it passed, and so now people in Indiana can now take their guns to places they couldn't before. On that note, the bill's not even a year old yet, and we've had a couple incidents here where people want to abuse what I think they've got. We had a gentleman down in Evansville, took his handgun into the city park, and he had it where it was exposed, everybody could see it. Now, yeah, he's legal to do that. You can legally carry it in the open. But I'm asking people, and he couldn't have done this before. He couldn't have gone to a city park before. He couldn't have gone to the zoo. You couldn't go into some of the buildings that you can now go. But he did this, and my opinion of this is, you're flaunting this. You're rubbing it in people's nose. Why would you do that? I just don't think that's the thing to do. And then a few weeks ago during election day, we had a gentleman up here in the northern end of the state took a gun into a polling area and he too had his shirt draped over so you could see his handgun. He went in the polling area. They threw him out. The sheriff was called in, and the thing has come down to where they couldn't find a law that prohibited him because there is none. But the problem I'm saying here, folks, is this. I'm worried that when people do these things, we finally got something very nice, I think, that we can take these guns. Why would you jeopardize it by challenging it? Because somebody will pick you up, somebody will take you up on it. And it's in the courts right now that some of these two cases I know about. If we have a judge that would rule against this law, and we could, I don't say that it can't happen, and they would maybe deem that this is a unconstitutional law, it could go to the Indiana Supreme Court. Remember last year what the Indiana Supreme Court did with our castle doctrine. They ruled against us on the castle doctrine, and we had to fix that this past session. Again, that people have the right to protect themselves in their own homes against unlawful entry. If they would do this with this bill, we could lose what we had, and it's not even a year old. I'm just telling you guys, you know, let's not push our luck on stuff. Let's not challenge things. Why would you got your gun with you? Couldn't you be happy enough to have it with you now? That's the purpose, that it's with you at all times. And is it so hard that to conceal it? Is it asking too much to conceal it? And just and I don't even understand why you'd want to tip your hand off anyway, because if somebody did come to a room that wanted to shoot the place up, you're the first target if he sees you with your gun. But I just want to reiterate, these laws that we get passed are very difficult. They don't come easy. Anything we lose, folks, we probably will never get back. And I just want to leave that with you. I probably went too long, but I just tell you, I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have on these matters, and these guys will be able to tell you more about the legal aspects of it. But just remember this, what we get, we lose it. The chance of getting it back is virtually impossible.